What would you do if a black woman, dressed simply, with no bodyguards, no designer bags, was dragged off a plane in front of hundreds of passengers simply because she didn't look like someone who belonged in business class? No shouting, no resistance, not a single loud word, just silence and a stare, cold, familiar, so familiar, she didn't even flinch. And what no one on Flight 761 that day knew was that the woman they had just quietly watched being humiliated was the very person about to blow up the $4.8 billion deal their airline had bet its entire future on. This is the story of Naomi Carter, a girl who grew up in the dusty alleyways of East Compton, built the most powerful AI ethics platform in America, and turned a moment of humiliation into the new global standard of dignity for the aviation industry. And it all began with a single ticket, a closed door, and a look of quiet disdain. No one would have guessed that the curly-haired girl who used to sit curled up on the porch along Wilmington Avenue would one day rewrite the rules of the entire global aviation industry. In East Compton, California, people don't talk about tech innovation or artificial intelligence. They talk about staying out of gang violence, making it through the week, and hoping no more kids get hit by stray bullets on their way to school. Naomi Carter grew up there, in a small 3-bedroom house with crooked windows and a wooden gate that creaked every time the wind blew. Her mother, Olivia Carter, was a night shift nurse at a public hospital in South Central, sleeping 3 hours a day and coming home to cook and take care of Naomi's little sister. Her father was killed when Naomi was just 4, caught in crossfire between 2 rival gangs outside a laundromat. The family survived on overtime wages, boxes of ramen noodles, and a quiet belief that education was the only way out of this cycle of despair. Naomi wasn't like the other kids in the neighborhood. She was quiet, observant, and had an unusual patience for broken things. Like the old Dell computer Olivia had gotten from a former patient, something that seemed only good as a paperweight. But Naomi spent weeks trying to figure out how to turn it on, unscrewing every bolt, reconnecting wires, until one day the screen flickered to life and displayed the first line, "Booting system." That was the first time Naomi cried tears of joy. She was only 11. From then on, she never left the computer. She taught herself programming through free websites, wrote her first lines of code to control a webcam's lighting. She created a small app to help her mother track patient medication schedules, then a simple script that predicted her mother's overtime shifts based on prior schedules. No one taught her. She tinkered, failed, and tried again. Her math teacher at Jefferson High noticed Naomi when she solved 3 advanced differential equations during a regular class session. When asked if she'd copied the answers, she simply opened her laptop and rewrote the solutions using an entirely different method. No one in the class understood what she was doing, but the teacher did. He submitted Naomi's profile to Palm Valley Academy, a prestigious private school in Santa Monica that offered full scholarships for gifted students. Naomi was accepted, and that was when the real battle began. Palm Valley was nothing like Jefferson. There, students arrived in Teslas, with parents who were CEOs, lawyers, and Hollywood directors. Naomi came to class in worn-out Converse shoes and brought lunch in a paper bag packed by her mom. Her classmates smirked when they saw her unpack a peanut butter sandwich in a bruised apple. But what they couldn't laugh at were her test scores. Naomi always ranked top of the class. She wrote code faster than anyone, even helping a teacher fix a broken Python script mid-lesson. But instead of recognition, she was called into the principal's office for suspected cheating. One teacher believed it was impossible for a black student from a working-class neighborhood to produce such an accurate grade prediction algorithm. 3 meetings were held. Naomi's mom took unpaid leave to defend her daughter. Eventually, after a university lecturer examined the code and confirmed it was Naomi's original work, the school apologized. But none of the teachers who had doubted her spoke up. No one admitted they were wrong. They just went silent. And Naomi learned something. Sometimes you have to be so good they can't ignore you. But even then, you can still be dismissed if you don't have the right skin color. At 17, Naomi graduated from Palm Valley with a perfect GPA, becoming the school's first student from East Compton to earn a full scholarship to MIT in computer science. She moved to Boston, lived in a cramped dorm, and ate instant noodles for a month to save money for a secondhand GPU. She had no close friends. She didn't party, but she had one belief. One day, artificial intelligence could be used to protect people. Not in a Hollywood way, but quietly. Detecting fraud, preventing data leaks, safeguarding privacy. Her graduation thesis, a machine learning framework capable of analyzing user behavior to detect intrusion risks, earned her interview offers from 3 major tech firms. But Naomi turned them all down. She said, "I don't want to sell my idea to someone else. I want to build it my own way." With $26,000 of leftover scholarship funds, a personal loan from her advisor, and the old Dell laptop she had kept since 6th grade, Naomi returned to California and founded NeuralShield, a cybersecurity startup with one mission: to protect what people can't see. In a ground-floor apartment in Inglewood, Naomi turned her living room into a server room, hung a whiteboard on the wall, wrote code in marker, and stuck system diagrams on Post-it notes. Every day she worked from 8 a.m. until 3 a.m. the next day. No investments came in. No one wanted to fund a black girl with no famous co-founder and no Wall Street pedigree. But Naomi didn't need them. She needed time, and time was something she had plenty of. In the first year, NeuralShield had only one small client, a local convenience store chain that had suffered 3 data breaches in a year. Naomi helped them stop the 4th. In year 2, a hospital in Arizona was hit by ransomware. Naomi used her algorithm to isolate the network and restore the system within 17 minutes. No PR, no press. But the name NeuralShield began circulating among professionals. In year 3, a commercial bank invited Naomi to test a suspicious login detection system. Result: fraud rates dropped by 83% in 60 days. When a reporter from Wired asked about the secret to her success, Naomi just smiled. "It's not that I'm better than anyone. I just didn't have the option to fail. I didn't have rich parents. I didn't have a house to sell for startup capital. I didn't have the luxury to fail 5 times and pitch for another round. I had one shot, and I couldn't let it slip." By the end of the 4th year, NeuralShield was valued at $1.8 billion. But Naomi remained the same. She commuted in her old Prius, still wore white shirts and gray slacks, paid all new hires equally regardless of degrees or backgrounds. And when Altura Air, one of America's 3 largest airlines, searched for a partner to deploy its global security system, they scheduled a meeting with NeuralShield. Naomi wasn't surprised. She knew it was time to step into the spotlight, but she didn't know that spotlight would become the start of a nightmare. She had no idea that people would be willing to drag a CEO out of a first-class seat, slam her head into the cabin ceiling, just because she didn't have the right skin color. But before that happened, before the blood and the viral videos, there was a girl from East Compton who used to hear gunshots at night through the window, who taught herself to code in silence, and made a promise to herself: "If the world doesn't make room for me, I'll make one." And that's why Naomi Carter didn't quit. Not because she wanted to win, but because failure was never an option. For the first 3 years, NeuralShield didn't have an office nameplate, no VC funding, no media coverage, no LinkedIn posts showing off a new headquarters or a cheerful founding team photo. There was only Naomi Carter, an old HP laptop, a whiteboard propped up by a wooden chair, and a mind map cluttered with system names, data flow charts, algorithm chains, and one sentence written in red marker in the center: "Don't let the world tell you you're not good enough." She read that line every morning after making coffee with a rusty kettle and sat down at her desk in her rented apartment in Inglewood, where her bedroom doubled as her server room, kitchen, and sometimes even a network testing station when clients called with an emergency. She never hired a PR firm. She didn't know how to use LinkedIn. She didn't have a CTO, a CMO, or anyone in a C-suite. She was the coder, the bug fixer, the one who sent invoices, and the person answering midnight client calls when the alert system misfired. She was also the one who picked up the phone the first time a small bank in Arizona was hit by a cyber attack and couldn't log into its internal system. Naomi didn't ask many questions. She requested the log files, connected via VPN, and after 21 minutes, she responded, "Port 8080 was being exploited through a reversed binary access stream. I've blocked it. You can log back in now." Silence on the other end, then a quiet exhale, followed by a middle-aged man's voice. "Who are you?" Naomi simply replied, "Someone who doesn't have time to fail." That was Neural Shield's first revenue. Just a few $1,000s, but enough for her to buy a stronger server, pay for high-speed internet, and hire a senior-year student as a part-time technical assistant who would later become her chief systems officer. The following year, a hospital in Denver experienced a network failure. All vitals monitors lost connection at once. Naomi was called in as a last resort solution after the entire IT team within the city's medical network had given up. She showed up with just a USB drive and a small Python file. Within 32 minutes, the entire system was restored. The cause, a faulty line of code accidentally included in the latest security update. Naomi's AI had detected a repetitive anomaly across 27 system access logs, something the human eye would have missed. When asked what the system was called, Naomi smiled. NeuroSentinel. It learns how humans respond to attacks in order to stop them before they happen. From then on, the name Neural Shield began to quietly surface in technical briefings. Some cybersecurity heads at major banks started paying attention. They didn't know who Naomi was. They assumed it was a new startup backed by a major firm or a spin-off of a big tech conglomerate. No one imagined the CEO was a young black woman with no office, no signage, and a habit of declining press interviews. Naomi didn't need the spotlight. She needed the system to work, and her system worked extremely well. In year 3, Phoenix Valley Bank, one of the largest financial institutions in the Southwest, invited her to run a NeuroSentinel trial on their internal ATM network. After 3 weeks, Naomi's system flagged an abnormal behavior pattern, a group of users conducting transactions during lunch hours from the same IP region at ATMs spread nearly 20 miles apart. No one on the bank's IT team noticed. Naomi just needed one log file in 20 minutes. This is a distributed attack probe. They're testing your system's security response lag, she explained. An alert was sent to the FBI. 2 weeks later, a high-tech cybercrime ring was arrested. Phoenix Valley signed a $4.2 million security contract with Neural Shield. Naomi still didn't rent an office. When investors called, she declined. "I don't need money to decorate. I need time to protect." And they didn't understand. They didn't understand how a company with no media reps and no glossy C-suite could get half the financial institutions in the West using its system within 3 years. But Naomi's clients understood. They understood from the accurate alerts, from the 2 a.m. calls where she would say, "Your third server is showing a suspicious internal access pattern." And she was always right. NeuroSentinel didn't just detect attacks. It learned how people think, how bad actors manipulate psychology. It was the creation of a woman who had grown up in an environment where survival meant predicting the next danger before it arrived. Naomi always said, "I built AI the same way I used to watch my neighbors when I was little, to know when to shut the windows, when to turn off the lights, when to stay silent." NeuroSentinel was a coded version of survival, and that made all the difference. But to Naomi, success was never a personal goal. She used the earnings from her first big contract to launch a cybersecurity training program for students at her old high school in Compton. She hired 6 students with no formal degrees, but strong hands-on skills, and paid them starting salaries equal to those at big corporations. She didn't implement a diversity policy. She was diversity. Neural Shield became one of the first tech companies where 70% of the engineering team were people of color, women, and LGBTQ+, not because of trends, but because of talent. In year 4, Naomi began gaining attention beyond the tech world. A Forbes article titled "The PR-Free Black Girl Changing the Entire Security Industry" marked her first appearance in mainstream media. But Naomi declined interviews. She felt the work wasn't done yet, until a call came from Altura Air. Altura, a globally recognized airline serving over 85 million passengers annually, had just suffered a major data breach. Over 50,000 passenger records were leaked. They needed a new security system, comprehensive, intelligent, adaptable, and trustworthy. And the tech department had recommended one name: Neural Shield. Naomi accepted the consultation, but instead of sending a representative, she went herself. Quietly. No assistant, no car service. She sat down across from 6 senior executives in crisp suits, spread the NeuroSentinel schematics across the table, and said, "I'm not just selling software. I'm selling back the control you thought you had lost." 3 months of negotiations followed. Naomi had convinced everyone, except one person: Gregory Nash, Chief Operating Officer of Altura. He never met her in person. Every time a meeting involved Naomi, he claimed to be unavailable. But he did send internal emails. "I don't trust a company that's only been around a few years with a CEO no one's seen to protect our entire global flight infrastructure." Another director responded, "We don't need to see her face. We just need to see that her product works better than anything we've used before." But Gregory wouldn't budge. And when the $4.8 billion contract was nearly finalized, Naomi prepared for one last flight to New York to sign this historic deal. She didn't know that Gregory already had her flight itinerary, and he had booked a seat on that very same flight. And she didn't know that seat 3A, the one she selected to review the final draft of the contract, was the seat he always took on that route. She only knew one thing: she was flying for business, not to compete over a seat, not to prove herself, not to become a symbol. But sometimes the people who least want to be a symbol are forced into history just because they dared to sit down. It all started with a Zoom call, camera off. Altura Air's technical division had spent 2 months testing different security solutions, and in the end, they needed a system strong enough to manage operational data from over 700 aircraft, 122 airport gates, and hundreds of thousands of transactions per hour. They reached out to NeuralShield not because they knew who Naomi Carter was, but because of irrefutable reports from 3 banks and 2 major hospitals that had used the NeuroSentinel system for over a year without a single cyber attack. The call lasted 38 minutes. Naomi didn't turn on her camera. She simply said, clearly and calmly, "I don't protect data. I protect human behavior, because real risk always comes from people, not machines." On the other end of the line, Altura's engineers glanced at one another. They had never heard an approach like that before. And so the deal began, not with fanfare, but with 3 questions, 1 demo, and a single promise. "I'll send you a test build within the next 6 hours." 2 weeks later, Naomi sat in a frosted glass conference room at Altura's Dallas headquarters. She didn't bring a team. She brought a tablet, a trial agreement, and a slide deck with just one word on the first page: silence. "The reason most security systems fail is because they're noisy," she said. "Alerts everywhere, constant disconnects, disrupting entire operational chains. NeuroSentinel doesn't do that. It learns. It observes. And only when it's certain there's abnormal behavior, then it reacts." The technical directors sat in silence. They had never witnessed a presentation where the speaker wasn't trying to sell something. Naomi simply explained, then let the data speak. The trial began at 2 airports, LAX and JFK. NeuroSentinel was integrated with the ticketing system, employee intranet, and baggage inspection data streams. Within 10 days, the system detected 12 abnormal access points, including an employee working remotely, using an unencrypted device to access airport networks, and an incident involving deliberate uploading of card data to an unsecured server. The previous system had flagged nothing. Naomi sent the report, attached real-time logs, and included no commentary. By the end of the 2nd month, Altura began migrating the test infrastructure into live environments. A framework agreement worth $180 million was drafted, divided into 4 implementation phases. Naomi's demeanor didn't change. No flashy outfits, no accompanying legal team, no printed brochures. But in every meeting, she knew Altura's system architecture better than the company's own head of IT. And that began to make some people uncomfortable. Among them was Gregory Nash, Chief Operating Officer of Altura Air, a white man from Georgia, former military, known for his conservative stance and pride in company tradition, a man who once said in an internal meeting, "This company was built by people who know what they're doing, not by coders who don't understand aviation culture." He refused to attend any session where Naomi was present. In one internal email thread, Gregory wrote, "I'm not opposed to NeuralShield's solution, but I don't trust a fledgling company with no structured leadership to operate at global scale. We need a more seasoned partner." Naomi learned of this feedback from a technical staffer who secretly forwarded her the email. She replied with just one sentence: "Let my system speak." And her system did speak, by reducing data latency at Newark Airport by 38%, detecting an API vulnerability in the domestic booking software, and most critically, issuing a 2-day early warning before a partner airline system was exploited. She didn't say a word, just sent an email. Attached are full logs. Third-party breach attempt blocked at 3:41 a.m. By the third month, Altura officially moved to draft a $4.8 billion contract, a full deployment of NeuroSentinel across their entire international network, with added strategic advisory rights in cybersecurity. The entire executive boardroom agreed. Only one meeting remained for the final sign-off, at Altura's New York office. Naomi was invited as an honorary guest. She chose to fly a day early to rest and carefully review Clause 47, where a few minor amendments still needed final approval. To show good faith, Naomi chose to fly on Altura Air, the partner airline. She didn't use a company ticket. She paid for her own first-class seat on the Los Angeles to JFK flight. She wanted to demonstrate her trust in the partner, and she wanted to prove no media, no pomp, no prestige deal needed. She could sit at the biggest table with nothing but intellect and capability. When booking, she chose seat 3A, the quiet left corner, easy for working. Meanwhile, in another Altura office, Gregory Nash read that flight information through the internal system. No one questioned why he suddenly booked a seat on the same flight, same time, but in a different cabin. No one asked why, after consistently refusing to meet Naomi, he chose to be on the same flight as her, on the very day before the contract was to be signed. Naomi didn't know any of that. She still woke up early, prepared her pitch, packed her laptop, and called a car to the airport like usual. She didn't wear heels. She wore low black leather shoes, formal enough, but comfortable for moving around. She wore a gray blazer, white shirt, black slacks, and no visible brand logos. She didn't need to be recognized. She only needed to be heard. When she stepped onto Altura Flight 761, Naomi didn't know her life was about to change. Not because of the contract she was about to sign, but because of a seat she had legally purchased, and a man who believed he had the right to sit anywhere, even in the seat of someone he didn't think deserved to be there. Naomi settled into 3A, opened her tablet, and began reviewing the revisions to Clause 47. That clause governed data response times in the International Baggage Tracking System, and Naomi wanted it reduced to 200 milliseconds. She was so focused she didn't hear the overhead announcements. And then, a shadow loomed over her. A deep, cold, familiar voice said, "I think you're in the wrong seat." Naomi looked up. In front of her stood Gregory Nash. "I think you're in the wrong seat." Gregory Nash stood there, ticket in hand, eyes fixed on Naomi Carter. Calmly, she folded her tablet, looked up, eyes steady without a trace of tension. "No, sir. Seat 3A. That's exactly what my ticket says." She pulled out the e-ticket from her blazer pocket and held it up for him to see. Gregory didn't look. He turned instead to the flight attendant approaching them and spoke in a voice calibrated just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "She's in my seat. I always fly in 3A. There may be a system error." The flight attendant, a white woman in her mid-40s, neatly dressed, name tag reading Linda Shaw, stepped up, leaning slightly toward Gregory. "I'll check that immediately, Mr. Nash." Naomi felt the shift in Linda's demeanor from the moment she turned to her. No greeting, no neutral gaze, just a brief glance, then a curt sentence. "I need to see your ticket and ID." Naomi handed both over, her phone screen clearly displayed. 3A first class. Name, Naomi Carter. In a calm voice she said, "I bought this ticket 2 weeks ago, chose the seat myself. I need the quiet to work." Linda glanced at the screen, then turned to Gregory. "Sir, your ticket says 6C, not 3A. Gregory raised an eyebrow. "Must be a system glitch. I've booked 3A every year. This seat is always mine." Naomi was about to speak when Linda cut in. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We'll resolve this quickly. Mr. Nash is an executive gold member. I just need to re-verify." Re-verify? Naomi looked into Linda's eyes. That was not the look of someone impartial. That was the look of someone who had been briefed in advance. Naomi understood instantly. This was no misunderstanding. This was a test, or a challenge, or worse, a trap. "Ms. Carter," Linda said, voice stripped of even basic courtesy, "due to a temporary seating conflict, I'm requesting that you switch to 6C so Mr. Nash can sit in his usual seat." Naomi frowned slightly, still speaking gently. I'm sorry, but I can't change seats. I chose this one specifically for consistent power access. I have a major meeting right after landing. I can't risk issues with my equipment or timing. Linda didn't respond. She nodded slightly and walked away. But Naomi clearly noticed she didn't head toward the crew area. She pulled out her personal phone and began texting. Meanwhile, Gregory remained standing beside her, silent now, with a smirk on his face as if waiting for something. Naomi turned back to her tablet, pretending to resume work. But she knew it wasn't over, and she was right. 5 minutes later, Linda returned, not alone this time. Two men in black suits, wearing air marshal badges, appeared behind her. One was white, tall, with a buzz cut. The other shorter, stockier, lighter-skinned. Linda pointed toward Naomi. This passenger is refusing to comply with crew instructions and is disrupting the boarding process. I'm requesting your assistance. Naomi couldn't believe what she was hearing. Excuse me, she said, her voice rising slightly. I'm in the seat I purchased. I'm not causing a scene. The one trying to claim it is Mr. Nash. She held up her ticket and ID again, this time directly to the two agents. The taller one, badge reading Agent Parker, looked them over, then glanced at Linda. She does have 3 A's. Linda shrugged. I'm just following protocol. Mr. Nash is a priority passenger. System glitches happen. Naomi took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She knew any reaction now labeled as attitude could be used to mark her as non-compliant. Ma'am, Agent Parker said, flight crew have authority to reassign seating in necessary cases. I need you to cooperate and either move to another seat or deplane. Why? Naomi asked, still composed. Why am I being asked to move when I purchased this seat, presented valid documents, and the other person doesn't have a ticket for it? We don't want to escalate, the second agent cut in, voice losing patience. But if you continue to resist, we'll have to take stronger measures. A passenger behind them spoke up. She's in the right seat. I saw it from the start. Another whispered, something's off here. Naomi looked around. Some passengers nodded subtly, but no one stood up. They just held their phones. Some were already recording. Naomi spoke slowly. I am not being disruptive. I'm sitting in the seat I paid for. If you want me to move, I request to speak with a supervisor or airline representative. Linda jumped in immediately. We don't have time for legal procedures. You're delaying the flight. Naomi knew that word, delaying, was the key word. Once that word made it into a report, the legal repercussions would fall on her. She knew that well. She'd advised 3 clients who faced similar situations, but they hadn't had proof. Naomi did. She opened her tablet, tapped record, and looked up. I am now recording this entire exchange. This is evidence. I am not being disruptive. I am not shouting. I am not refusing to comply. I am simply requesting to be treated fairly. Agent Parker signaled to the other man. We're removing her. Naomi stood up just as they approached. But as she reached for her bag, the second agent grabbed her arm and yanked her toward the aisle. I can walk on my own, Naomi said loudly, but didn't yell. She was shoved into the seat frame, her head bumping lightly against the armrest. Stop that, another passenger shouted. A young woman in the row behind raised her phone. I'm live streaming. Naomi tried to turn. I'm being removed. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I refused to give up my seat to someone more powerful. Her hand slipped from the seat back. She lost balance, hitting her head on the cabin ceiling as she was pulled toward the door. One of her black leather shoes slid off mid-aisle. A thin streak of blood bloomed on her white sleeve. That moment, a black woman in business attire, one shoe off, dragged forward under the indifferent stares of some and the horrified eyes of others, was recorded by 3 separate passengers. One of them was Kayla Monroe, a journalism intern en route to a media conference in New York. She filmed the entire incident on her phone. No edits, no filters, no cuts. Naomi was forced off the plane like a criminal. Linda stood at the cabin door, arms crossed, not even glancing her way. As Naomi was dragged past her, she whispered, just loud enough to stay off camera. First class isn't for people who don't know their place. Naomi didn't respond. She knew. This wasn't about a seat anymore. This was a system, testing how she would respond when publicly humiliated. and that system was about to find out. It had just dragged the wrong person off the plane. Naomi Carter was dragged out of the first-class cabin amid a chaotic murmur and conflicted stares from the passengers. Some raised their phones to record. Some turned away in shame. Some whispered things no one wants to hear, but are all too familiar. Maybe she did something wrong. Maybe she lost her temper. Maybe she wasn't the one who bought the ticket. These were the maybes born from prejudice, from the default belief that a simply dressed black woman couldn't possibly be sitting in the right seat. That kind of bias doesn't need evidence. It just needs an excuse to stay silent. The two air marshals gave Naomi no chance to walk on her own. She was yanked down the aisle across 3 rows of seats, her head swaying from imbalance, one shoe missing, her hand bruised and reddening from the forceful grip. As she passed the cabin door, she heard Linda Shaw softly into her radio. "It's done. The flight can proceed." As if removing her from the plane was just another box to check, like fastening seatbelts. No one on the crew asked if she needed medical assistance. No one asked if she was okay. Naomi was escorted off the aircraft like a misplaced bag, and the bitter irony was, her actual luggage remained at seat 3A, along with the $4.8 billion contract that was set to be signed the very next morning. At JFK Terminal, Naomi was taken to a small windowless room in the internal security zone. She sat on a cold metal chair, blood seeping at her wrist, her head slightly spinning from hitting the cabin ceiling. When she asked to speak with legal representation, the security supervisor said, "We need to complete the internal report first." When she requested medical attention, they replied, "You're not injured severely enough to require emergency services." When she asked where her phone was, they said, "Temporarily held for investigative purposes." Each answer was an invisible slap. Naomi realized she was no longer being treated as a passenger. She was being treated as a problem, something to contain, silence, and forget as quickly as possible. 3 hours passed in that room. No water, no lawyer, no one checking in. An internal security officer finally entered and placed a handwritten incident report on the table. The title read, "Failure to comply with crew instructions, disruption of flight operations, public disturbance." Naomi looked him in the eye. "I sat in the correct seat. I presented proper documentation. I didn't cause a scene. Why am I being treated like a criminal?" He didn't respond. He just shrugged, flipped the page and said, "Sign here to acknowledge you've been informed." Naomi didn't sign. Outside that small room, the world had already begun to shift in ways Altura Air couldn't have imagined. The video recorded by Kayla Monroe, 2 minutes and 37 seconds long, unedited, without filters, began circulating across social media. The clip opened with Naomi being pulled from her seat by 2 agents, one barefoot, her head striking the armrest, blood seeping from her forehead. Kayla's voice came through clearly. She said she had a ticket, showed all her documents, but they still dragged her away. The final line in the video was Naomi's own voice, spoken as she was being dragged. "I just wanted to sit, but they wanted me to disappear." That single sentence became the caption on hundreds of thousands of shares within just 3 hours. The account at JusticeFly reposted the clip with the hashtag #LetHerSit. The page at Black Tech Voices called it the most brutal CEO removal in American aviation history. Meanwhile, mainstream media began tracking the identity of the woman in the video. When a tech reporter from TechBrief confirmed that the woman being dragged was Naomi Carter, CEO of NeuralShield, the company set to sign a $4.8 billion cybersecurity deal with Altura Air. The internet exploded. The story was no longer just about a passenger forcibly removed. It became, an airline dragged their own strategic partner off a plane because of who she was. Back in the small holding room at the airport, Naomi still hadn't been released. She checked the time. Nearly midnight. Her left shoulder throbbed more with each passing minute. The cut on her forehead had dried, but a lingering chill crawled through every knuckle. A security officer walked in and tossed her handbag onto the table. "You're free to go. Someone will be picking you up." Naomi asked, "Am I being charged with anything?" He didn't answer, just muttered, "Altura will be in touch." She picked up the bag. Her laptop was still inside. The contract was still there. Her phone, battery down to 4%, showed 97 missed calls. Most were from Terrell, her executive assistant. She called back. His voice came through anxious, almost breathless. Naomi? Finally, where have you been? We've postponed tomorrow's meeting. The video's going viral. Everything's blowing up. Are you okay? Naomi didn't answer immediately. She looked down at the dried blood on her sleeve, then said softly, I'm not sure I'm okay, but I'm awake, and I'm very, very angry. Within minutes, Naomi was escorted to a hotel near the airport. A private physician was dispatched. The doctor confirmed she had a minor head injury, a swollen left wrist, and signs of mild internal bruising. Meanwhile, Terrell and Neural Shield's legal team initiated emergency protocol, gathering evidence, documenting violations of aviation procedures, tracing Gregory Nash's travel history, and identifying who accessed Naomi's flight reservation. And as all teams worked through the night, Naomi sat alone in the hotel's living room, replaying Kayla's video. She saw herself, an image both painful and undeniable. She rewound it, pausing on the frame where Linda Shaw stood at the cabin door, arms folded, watching like someone who had just taken out the trash. Naomi closed her eyes for a few seconds, then opened them and forwarded the video to the entire executive board of Neural Shield. Along with one short note, tomorrow morning we're not signing that contract, we're rewriting it. The next morning, the early news opened with the video of Naomi being pulled from her seat on Altura Flight 761. The anchor spoke in a calm, measured tone. A female passenger was removed from the first-class cabin for allegedly sitting in the wrong seat, but the truth has stunned the entire country. As millions of Americans began their day with coffee and a TV screen, the name Naomi Carter appeared across every platform: CNN, Bloomberg, Fox News, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit. But strangely, Altura Air said nothing. No apology, no official statement, not a single press release. They chose silence, a cold kind of silence, as if the incident had never happened, or as if they were waiting for the storm to pass. And in that very silence, another wave began to rise. Countless people began sharing their own stories: Black passengers, modestly dressed women, entrepreneurs not wearing luxury watches, who had been asked, "Are you sure your ticket is for first class?" Who had been politely asked to move for a more frequent flyer, who had been denied service because they didn't look like a customer. The hashtag number sign not rich enough began to spread. One person wrote, "A flight attendant once asked me to stand up mid-flight because they didn't believe I was the lead engineer." Another shared, "I wore a hoodie, carried a laptop, sat in the VIP lounge, and was told, 'This area is not for maintenance staff.'" Naomi sat in her hotel room, quietly reading every post. She didn't cry, but each story felt like a small blade twisting in the part of her memory she had tried to bury. Like the day when she was a child and her mother, Olivia Carter, took her into a toy store in Long Beach, and a clerk approached them to ask, "Do you two realize this store is quite expensive?" Or when Naomi was 15, invited to a math outreach event at UCLA, and the program director said, "Are you sure you're one of the selected students, or did you enter the wrong room?" Those memories, once buried under code, ambition, and success, came back. Because of one truth: she didn't look like someone who had the right to sit in seat 3A, and Altura knew it. She was sure they did. In the booking system, customer profiles included photos, corporate affiliations, travel history, but all they needed to do, or rather, all they needed was to look at the way she walked into the cabin to decide, no way. Naomi asked herself, if that day she had worn a designer gown, a Rolex, and carried a letter of partnership stamped by the CEO of Altura, would she have been dragged out? And the answer hurt more than the anger. Probably not. At a 10 a.m. emergency meeting that day, the Neural Shield leadership team sat around the table with one major question: should we proceed with the $4.8 billion deal? Terrell said, "We've spent 3 months testing. If we back out now, the shareholders will question everything." The deputy CFO added, "The agreement is almost finalized. A slip-up like this shouldn't derail the whole strategy." Naomi remained silent. Then she opened her laptop and played the video of her being dragged from the plane. No one in the room dared to breathe. When the video ended, Naomi spoke with a calm so sharp it chilled the room. "We're not pulling out, but we're not signing on their terms. Another silence fell over the room. This time, the silence of strategy. The silence of people about to strike in a way the system never saw coming. And so Naomi decided to do something few CEOs would ever dare. Go public. She posted a personal statement on LinkedIn. Short, without accusations, without rallying cries. Just one title. What does it cost to look like you don't belong? The post described in detail how she was dragged off the plane, not for breaking any rule, but because no one believed she had enough money or enough authority to be in that cabin. It didn't call for a boycott. It asked, if I were a blonde woman in designer clothes carrying a Louis Vuitton suitcase, would anyone have laid a hand on me? The post reached 2.4 million engagements in 12 hours. Over 19 other CEOs reposted it, including the head of a rival tech firm to Altura, with a comment, I've been asked if I was the food delivery guy while arriving to pitch a VC board. A former U.S. Secretary of Transportation wrote, if this is how a billion-dollar partner is treated, I can't imagine how average passengers are handled. And then, like dominoes, 3 other airlines announced they were suspending negotiations with Altura due to lack of transparency in crisis response. Altura stayed silent, but their stock price began to drop. Naomi didn't give interviews. She didn't go on talk shows. She did only one thing. She resent the $4.8 billion contract, this time revised, with a new clause 1.1.a. Neural Shield representatives shall have the right to access, assess, and intervene in any process involving customer, passenger, or partner screening in order to ensure equal access to services, which meant Naomi and her team would gain access to security cameras, passenger handling logs, and flight crew training protocols as part of the cybersecurity agreement. When Altura received the updated contract, Gregory Nash nearly slammed the table. He wrote, she's turning this into politics. Terrell responded on Naomi's behalf simply, no, she's turning injustice into transparency. Naomi understood one thing. She could forgive a mistake, but she could not forgive a system built to doubt people like her from the first glance. And if she had stepped onto their playing field with intelligence, with product, and with integrity, then she would use those very things to change the field, change the rules, and change the way a black woman is perceived when she walks through a door. At 9:46 a.m., 2 days after the incident, the NASDAQ homepage abruptly displayed a short but heavy message. Altura Air Holdings, Inc. 7.4%, Altura, Neural Shield Technologies, plus 5.9% dry numbers, but with massive weight. In less than 36 hours, Altura's stock had lost nearly 12% of its market capitalization. Raw figure, nearly $4.1 billion wiped from the books. Meanwhile, Neural Shield's value soared, not because of AI, not because of cybersecurity, but because of her, the woman dragged from her seat, who didn't argue, didn't insult, didn't call for revenge, but simply rewrote the contract. And when the revised agreement landed on Gregory Nash's desk, the chairman of Altura, he knew Naomi didn't need to shout, didn't need a press conference. She only had to insert a new clause in a place no one could remove. That clause, labeled 1.1a, was not a punch to the face, but to the heart. A demand for access to training protocols, internal reviews, and most notably, permission for Neural Shield's investigators to access cabin camera systems. Gregory was furious. He called the lawyers. He called HR. But none of them could say, we're rejecting this. Because if they rejected it, Naomi could walk away from the table. And if she walked, the entire AI security infrastructure Altura had been implementing since last year, worth $4.8 billion, would collapse. No one else had a military-grade system like Neural Shield. No one else could process passenger data at Tier 3 clearance like she could. And worst of all, no one wanted to do business with an airline now facing allegations of systemic racial bias. That morning, Naomi walked into Neural Shield's shareholder boardroom wearing an unbranded brown coat, her hair neatly tied back, no makeup. She brought a laptop, no printed copies, no assistant. When she entered, the entire room stood. No one told them to. They just did, because they understood she had just turned being dragged from a seat into a political turning point for the entire industry. Naomi didn't say much. She simply presented the revised clause. Then she proposed three decisions. 1. Neural Shield would not sign directly with Altura, but instead with an oversight committee appointed by the U.S. Department of Transportation. 2. Neural Shield would launch the industry's first hidden bias scoring system for service providers. 3. The entire contract would be partially released to the public to prove transparency. When she finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. But Naomi didn't smile. She only said, "We haven't won. But now prejudice has to talk to someone with power." Meanwhile, Altura's internal chaos deepened. A leaked memo surfaced, an email from Linda Shaw to Gregory Nash, with the subject line, "Regarding passenger 3A, handled per risk avoidance protocol." When the media got hold of it, a firestorm broke out. What does risk avoidance protocol mean? Judging people by how they look. And as reporters swarmed, Linda was placed on suspension. Gregory, meanwhile, was summoned by the Civil Aviation Ethics Committee. They wanted answers. Why hadn't Altura issued an official apology? And if Naomi weren't a CEO, would the airline have stayed silent? That's when a chilling truth came to light. Altura had had 12 similar incidents over the past 6 years, but none had consequences because the victims weren't famous. Naomi had done what no one else had managed. She forced prejudice to answer in public without needing to raise her voice. 1 week after the incident, Naomi agreed to a single interview with The Atlantic. In the conversation, she didn't mention the contract. She didn't mention the stock price. She only told one small story, the day she was 11 when her mother took her to the airport for the first time. They waited over 4 hours for a delayed flight. No announcements, no assistance. Naomi asked, "Mom, why is no one telling us anything?" Her mother simply replied, "Because we don't look like the kind of people they think need help." From that day forward, Naomi made herself a promise. One day I'll build a system where no one has to look like someone to be treated like a human being. And today, when prejudice ran headfirst into her power, the answer began to take shape. Not with a scream, but with a contract. Clause 1.1a. 10 a.m., 33rd floor boardroom, Neural Shield headquarters. The $4.8 billion contract between Altura Air and Neural Shield was already printed, neatly stacked on the table. 213 pages, 3 copies, 3 fountain pens lined up in place. Everything was prepared to finalize the deal. Everything, except one thing. Naomi Carter had not signed. She sat there back straight, gaze steady, eyes fixed on Gregory Nash, the CEO from Altura, who smiled patiently across the table, flanked by 2 lawyers, a legal assistant, and a board representative. The room wasn't as tense as one might expect. It didn't feel confrontational, but carried the quiet weight of something about to be redefined, once and for all. Naomi flipped to page 17, then page 42, then paused at clause 57.2b, the section on allocation of passenger data responsibility between parties. She tapped her pen lightly on the clause and said slowly, "I won't be signing this version. I'll be sending a new one this afternoon. The structure will be completely different. And this time, it won't be about Altura protecting data, but about my system protecting people." Gregory tilted his head slightly. He smiled, a strange kind of smile, polite, but not entirely sincere. "We've negotiated for 4 months, Naomi. This agreement is the product of hundreds of hours of meetings. It's been vetted by lawyers on both sides." Naomi didn't look away. Her voice stayed level. "The old agreement was written in a world where someone like me could be dragged from her seat for not wearing high heels. That world no longer exists." Gregory fell silent. One of his lawyers spoke up. "If the contract is being fully revised, we need to know. To what extent?" Naomi opened her laptop. She projected the redesigned draft. Not a revision, but a total restructuring of the partnership framework. The new contract was split into 3 tiers. The technology layer, where Neural Shield's AI would protect data and onboard behavior. The operations layer, where all frontline staff would be retrained under a bias-agnostic protocol. And the dignity layer, a new concept Naomi introduced, requiring all partners to undergo hidden bias response audits in service interactions. A special clause called Section 0, a clause that had never existed before, opened the agreement with the line, All commercial cooperation begins with the principle, a human is a human, regardless of appearance, voice, or origin. Gregory asked, "Is this a political manifesto?" Naomi replied, "No, it's a survival manifesto. If a system can't protect someone from being dragged out of a seat just because they don't look like someone's idea of who belongs, then it's not a system. It's a trap written in legal language." She continued, "A new clause would allow Neural Shield to conduct anonymous testing at any Altura service point, airport, office, lounge, without prior notice. Another clause required all internal complaint handling records related to discriminatory behavior to be open to third-party audit. And the most disruptive clause, Neural Shield would have the right to immediately terminate the agreement if the implicit bias index, calculated by their own system, exceeded the acceptable threshold. No warning required. Altura's lawyers objected. They called it intrusion into private enterprise operations. Naomi simply said, "I'm not intruding, I'm redefining." And for the first time during the meeting, Gregory said nothing. He just looked at her, not as a tech partner, but as something else entirely, a force, a social architect in the disguise of a coder. That afternoon, the new contract was delivered to Altura, a 67-page PDF. No Altura logo at the top, just a quote from Toni Morrison. "If you can only be tall because somebody is on their knees, then you have a serious problem." No one on Altura's legal team dared to respond immediately. They escalated it to the board. The board forwarded it to investors. And the investors, already worried by falling stock prices, didn't look at the contract structure. They looked at market data. Naomi Carter had just turned Neural Shield into the first AI company in America to secure a strategic contract where human dignity had commercial value. Within 36 hours, 4 other major firms reached out requesting to replicate the new contract model. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood. Naomi had just set a new standard for partnership in the age of invisible prejudice. 3 days later, Gregory Nash sent confirmation. Altura accepted the entire revised agreement, but no one in the company was allowed to disclose any contract detail to the media. Naomi issued no public statement. She simply sent an internal email to all Neural Shield employees. Not a single word about victory, not a word about revenge. The email contained only one sentence. "No contract is worth signing if it makes us smaller in character." And in that quiet, not triumphant, but unshakably dignified, Naomi accomplished what no CEO had done before. She turned a personal humiliation into a legally binding, historic framework. An emergency meeting at Altura's headquarters was called at 6:15 a.m., an absurd hour for a global corporation, but still enough to fill the room with nearly 30 people. Legal teams, media advisors, HR managers, and a few faces from partner investment funds. The meeting reason was listed plainly on the calendar. Cabin Image Review System, urgent response from Neural Shield. Gregory Nash entered the room with eyes darkened from lack of sleep. The calm strategist demeanor he once carried was gone. In front of him was a giant screen, paused on a frame extracted from Flight 761, capturing the moment Naomi was pulled from her seat. No shouting, no physical violence, but the way Linda Shaw stood in front of her, hands on hips, eyes scanning her from head to toe, smirking slightly before stepping back and pressing the call button for security, said everything. Everything. No audio needed, no subtitles. For the first time, prejudice was played in slow motion, lit under the scrutiny of behavior analyzing AI. A Neural Shield engineer stood at the head of the table, presenting the data. "This is our real-time reflexive bias scoring model, developed in-house." Linda Shaw triggered 12 behavioral flags categorized as implicit discrimination, 3 of which were red level, meaning they cannot be explained by standard procedure and are only attributable to personal bias. One Altura director interrupted, "We can't allow an external vendor to evaluate internal employee conduct." Naomi, appearing via Zoom, maintained her gentle tone. "We're not evaluating people. We're evaluating the system that let it happen, repeatedly, without being corrected." Gregory squinted, then snapped, "Are you turning my company into some kind of social experiment?" Naomi paused for a few seconds, then answered, "No. You did that long ago. I'm just turning on the lights." The screen switched. The next clip showed the moment after Naomi exited the cabin. The camera captured Linda turning to another flight attendant and quietly saying, "Just enough for the AI to read her lips. People like that shouldn't buy first class. Always a hassle." The room fell silent. A media officer tried to salvage it. "That phrase doesn't necessarily carry racial intent," Naomi replied, still calmly. "I agree. But the fact you feel the need to explain it means it should have never been said in the first place." Gregory roared, "This is a violation of employee privacy. You had no right to record and expose this." Naomi responded evenly. Per Clause 1.1a, signed by Altura itself, Neural Shield is authorized to access all cabin data for internal bias evaluation purposes. And this data has not been shared with any third party, only the ethics board Altura agreed to establish. All eyes turned to Gregory. He said nothing. He knew. He had signed that clause. For the first time in his 20-plus-year career, Gregory Nash, the man once hailed as a titan in aviation tech deals, dubbed the golden CEO of the digital mobility era, was being cornered by the very clause he had approved, forced to answer to indisputable data. And Naomi hadn't dragged him into this with fury. She had simply handed him a mirror, and the mirror was recording. That same day, news outlets ran headlines. Altura launches internal investigation after leaked clip. But everyone knew it wasn't leaked. It was aired, right on cue. A commentator on CNBC observed, "Neural Shield is no longer just an AI vendor. They've become the ethical architect of next-gen aviation." Meanwhile, Linda Shaw was suspended indefinitely. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that a wave of previously silenced passengers began to speak up. One had been asked to verify income before booking business class. Another had been reassigned mid-flight without reason, and now the data was flowing back to Naomi. She didn't need to attack. She only needed the truth and the right to expose it. At a brief press conference the next day, Gregory appeared, face pale. In front of reporters, he said, "We apologize for the inappropriate experience certain passengers may have faced." A journalist asked, "Do you acknowledge this was systemic racial bias?" Gregory didn't answer directly. He only said, "We're learning." And that begins with listening to voices like Ms. Carter's. But Naomi wasn't there. She was in Atlanta, speaking at a tech conference, presenting on implicit bias in automated systems. In her talk, she never mentioned Altura by name, but everyone knew the speech wasn't aimed at one airline. It was a wake-up call for an entire industry facing the truth. Prejudice doesn't need weapons. It doesn't need slurs. All it needs is a glance, a gesture, a sigh, and if never confronted, it becomes standard protocol. That evening, Naomi received an email from a woman named Carla, a former flight attendant who had worked for Altura, who resigned after a string of similar incidents. In her letter, Carla wrote, "I once got scolded for letting a black girl walk into the business cabin without double-checking her ticket. I knew I was wrong for staying silent. Today, because of you, I understand that silence is a form of complicity too. Thank you for not signing. Thank you for rewriting." At Atlanta International Airport, Gate 23B has just been renamed. A small silver plaque is mounted above the newly repainted boarding entrance. No company logo, no marketing slogan, only one engraved line: "Carter's Standard Boarding Protocol, piloted here, 2025. Passengers passing through that gate today, none of them know exactly what lies behind those words. They only know that from now on, every staff member here must go through a new protocol. Not just ticket verification, but behavioral ethics checks. No more silent seat reassignments based on appearance. No more questions like, 'Are you sure you booked business class?' No more professional intuition that's actually unconscious bias in disguise. Every interaction is now filtered through a tool called the Dignity Index, a dignity scoring system developed by Neural Shield and permanently installed at every Altura air service point. What no one says aloud but everyone understands is that this gate once bore a bloodstain. On the cabin floor of the Boeing 787 operating Flight 761, right after Naomi Carter was asked to leave her seat, she didn't resist, but during the process of standing up, a small scrape on her knee began to bleed. That blood dropped onto the navy blue carpet, and the cleanup crew afterward, instead of wiping it up, photographed it and filed it in an internal report as part of a non-compliance incident log. What they didn't know, that photo would later become evidence forcing Altura to audit its entire flight crew program. And when Naomi saw that image in the investigation records, she wasn't angry and she didn't sue. She made one simple request: do not clean the bloodstain until the reform process was complete, so that everyone would have to walk past it and remember. And so they did, for 23 days. Afterward, Naomi gave permission for it to be cleaned, and where the blood had been, now stood a new standard engraved. Gregory Nash was absent from the unveiling of the Carter Standard that day. He had resigned 6 days earlier in a short email to the board. No scandal, no press conference, just one sentence: a system is what it chooses to overlook. The board agreed to let him step down quietly, in exchange for Altura signing a document officially recognizing the Carter Standard as a permanent, non-retractable part of its operational model. To mitigate media damage, the board offered Naomi a symbolic $5 million goodwill gesture. Naomi declined. She didn't want compensation. Instead, she proposed the creation of a new fund called the 23B Foundation, dedicated to funding bias detection technologies and providing behavioral auditing tools to public service systems across the United States. She included a pledge: every dollar received will be converted into one less second of silence. The media called it a gentle turning point, but what was happening was anything but gentle. More than 12 other airlines immediately contacted NeuroShield, requesting to replicate the Carter Standard, from Singapore Airlines to JetBlue. A European carrier even offered to license it exclusively for their region. Naomi declined. Kindness should never require a license to scale, she said during a keynote in New York. And there she presented her boldest proposal yet: to integrate the Dignity Index into every hiring process in the service industry. Some called it unrealistic, but major hotel chains, from Hyatt to Marriott, quietly began pilot programs. 3 months after Flight 761, a 12-year-old black boy named Jerome, the son of a janitor who once worked in airport maintenance, was invited to visit the cockpit because he had written the best student essay in Georgia on how technology can make people better. In his essay, he wrote about Naomi Carter, but he didn't call her a businesswoman. He didn't call her the founder of an AI company. He wrote, "She's the person who stopped when she was treated unfairly, not to cry, but to fix it so the people after her wouldn't have to stop." That's when people realized standards aren't written by winners. They're written by those who refuse to sign what's wrong, even when they know they could win by staying quiet. By year's end, Time magazine named Naomi Carter Person of the Year, but Naomi declined the cover. Instead, she sent a single photo, standing in front of Gate 23B, wearing a black coat, head slightly tilted, not smiling. Below the photo was one caption: "Some victories do not have confetti, they just have less fear." It wasn't a grand victory, but it was a lasting one. And from that day forward, any passenger boarding a plane, if they passed through a door marked with the Carter Standard emblem, they knew, here, dignity doesn't need to be explained. In a small room at NeuroShield's research center in Santa Clara, the final team of programmers was completing the last lines of code for a special update. The protocol was called Horizon. It wasn't just a typical software upgrade. It was the final phase of Naomi's vision: to expand the Carter Standard beyond aviation, beyond airports, ticket counters, or business class cabins, to become a foundational layer of every interaction between people and institutions. Horizon wasn't a surveillance system, it was a reminder. People can no longer hide their bias in their gaze, in the order they choose who comes first, or in the selective nods. After Horizon, prejudice would no longer have a safe hiding place. On the day Horizon officially launched, Naomi didn't hold a press conference. She didn't appear on television. She went somewhere else, somewhere the media hadn't mentioned throughout this entire story. The place where she had once been denied boarding, Atlanta International Airport, Gate 23B, it had since been officially renamed Naomi Carter Passage. But Naomi didn't go there to cut a ribbon. She went to sit exactly where she had once been told to stand up and leave the seat she had rightfully purchased. No one at the airport that day recognized her. She wore a hoodie, sunglasses, and simply sat silently, observing. But this time, there was no unpleasant voice raised, no strange glances. No one asked to see her ticket. The service desk staff bowed to every passenger with the same tone of voice. And at the boarding area, the LED screen displayed, "Welcome. Please know you are seen and you are safe." Naomi smiled. She didn't need to check the software, because the real change wasn't in the system, but in the people who had learned how to behave differently. That night, she posted a single sentence on her personal account. For the first time in over a year of silence, "I didn't create justice. I just held a door open long enough for others to walk through." That post was shared 42 million times in just 3 days. But what surprised her most wasn't the number of shares. It was who shared it. A teacher in Ohio told the story of her first black student being elected class president without being mocked. An Arab-American nurse wrote about the first time a patient had called her by her correct name after 12 years in the field. A single Asian father shared that a bank employee had offered him a seat instead of immediately asking for his documents. No one mentioned AI or Neural Shield. They only spoke about moments when they were treated right, without having to demand it. A week later, the White House announced the establishment of the National Institute for Civil Service Dignity, with a scholarship named after Naomi Carter for students wanting to study the intersection of technology and social justice. During the announcement, the president didn't mention politics or party lines. He simply said, "She didn't come here to stand in front of us, but to clear a path for those we once refused to let move forward." Naomi wasn't there. She watched the live broadcast from a small cafe in Brooklyn, where she used to study during her startup days. The owner, an elderly black woman, recognized her, walked over, gently placed her hand on Naomi's shoulder and said, "Everyone has their own door, but not everyone dares to open it after it's been slammed shut 100 times. You opened it and kept it from closing again." Naomi didn't speak. She simply smiled. At that moment, outside on the street, a bus stopped. A little black girl around 10 years old stepped off, clutching her backpack, quickly crossing the intersection. On the back of her coat were the faintly printed words, "I belong anywhere." Naomi watched her and knew that even though she had never met that child, that little girl was the reason she had started it all. Change, once it truly begins, cannot be hidden. It cannot be shut down. It cannot be paused for review. It becomes a new standard, one that needs no justification, no explanation. It is right, and what is right endures. In the final internal email she sent to her team, Naomi wrote only one sentence. "When you no longer have to explain why you deserve dignity, that's when justice has arrived." Have you ever been judged just by the way you look? Have you ever walked up to a door where no one asked your name? No one looked into your heart? They just saw your skin color, your clothes, or where you came from? Naomi Carter didn't reclaim justice by shouting. She quietly stepped through a door that had been shut, then held it open for an entire generation after her. She didn't need to be seen. She only needed everyone else to be seen the right way. If today even one person is greeted with dignity at an airport, one little girl is called by her true name at school, or one father is no longer suspected when he walks into a bank, then this story is still continuing, not in a boardroom, but in the way we look at one another. If this video made you feel something, whether warmth, anger, or simply a deeper understanding, leave a comment below. Share a moment when you were rejected or when you were treated right. And if you believe that justice doesn't need to be loud to create change, hit subscribe so we can keep sharing stories like Naomi's. Because somewhere out there, a door still needs to be opened. And maybe you're the one who'll keep it open for the next person.